Good evening, everyone. My name is Sam Nasser, and this is the Azure Cleveland User Group. A little bit about the group. We meet every second Wednesday. The meetings are free of charge and open to the public, and we cover a variety of topics related to Azure, whether it's infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, or software as a service. You can find all the meeting information posted on meetup.com at the link listed at the bottom of the slide. We always like to give a big thank you to our sponsors, PostSharp and DevExpress, for sponsoring the post-meeting prizes, which will be given away using the eval form. We'd like to thank the .NET Foundation for sponsoring the Meetup site. And last but not least, NIS Technologies for sponsoring the online meeting space. Also, I'd like to give a big thank you to Manning.com for sponsoring a 35% off offer on a selection of books available at the link listed at the bottom of the slide using the discount code MTPCLEC21. And that link will be posted in chat in just a little bit. Some general information. First and foremost, please keep in mind participation is always encouraged. And like I always say, the only stupid question is the one not being asked. So always feel free to jump in with a question. However, when not speaking, kindly ask you to mute your microphones just to avoid any background noise. And we want to keep it casual, meaning jump in with any questions or comments at any point in time. But at the same time, we want to give enough time for our speaker to go through the slides and the demos. And lastly, the presentation is being recorded and will be posted on YouTube in just a few short days. So for tonight's feature presentation, we have automated information extraction with Azure AI Document Intelligence, and that is provided by Samuel Gomez. Sam has 13 plus years of software development, mostly in the Microsoft space. He is very passionate about artificial intelligence and machine learning and problem solving in general. When not coding, he loves to spend time with his family. He's an avid soccer player, loves video games, and loves movies. And so with that, Sam, I'd like to thank you for joining us, and let me go ahead and make you presenter.
Thank you, Sam, for having me again, and I hope that you all find this information useful. Sam already covered most of this. Just a little tidbit is I am originally from Mexico. I'm currently a tech lead at a consulting company called Geneca. Sam already went through most of the things that I love to do outside of technology, and can reach out to me at Twitter handle, or I guess X handle now. I'm still gonna call it Twitter. It's kind of a sea or sour in Chicago. I still call it sea or sour. GitHub repo and also my LinkedIn. Would love to connect and would be more than happy to answer any questions that you guys might have after the presentation. So the agenda for this presentation, we're gonna talk about the Azure AI offerings, specifically cognitive services and applied AI services at a high level overview. Also a big disclaimer, and we'll talk about why I am starting with those topics. And then we're going to get into the actual API that we're going to cover today, which is the Azure AI Document Intelligence. We're going to talk about the model options that are available for you, the input requirements for those models. We're going to talk about data privacy because working with documents, sometimes you're going to have sensitive information there. So I want to make sure that I tell you what the Microsoft does to protect your privacy when you're dealing with these documents. And then finally, we're going to see this API in action through a few different demos. So up until not that long ago, a couple months actually, Azure AI offerings via APIs were divided in two big groups. One of it was cognitive services. So we had the speech APIs, which allowed you to do things like speech to text or text to speech in your application. Language would allow you to do things like entity recognition, sentiment analysis, language understanding. Vision, which allowed you to do image analysis, OCR, and then the decision, which had APIs like anomaly detector. And then there was another group of APIs which were called applied services APIs, which were APIs that were specifically for for some business cases. And for example, the document intelligence, which was formerly known as Form Recognizer, Immersive Reader, Metrics Advisor, video indexer, cognitive search, and bot services. All those were in the applied services API group. Now, the reason why I talk about that is because as of a couple months ago, all those APIs are now under the umbrella of Azure AI services. If you go into the documentation, there isn't the distinction between cognitive services and applied AI services anymore. And there was also the renaming of some of those APIs, including the one that we're going to talk about today. So previously, this was known as Form Recognizer, and now it's called Document Intelligence. And the reason why I start with this disclaimer of sorts is because if you go into the documentation or if you look at tutorial and you hear or you see form recognizer being mentioned, I just want you to know that it's talking about the exact same API that we're going to talk about today. And you'll actually see it during the demo that there's still places, even in Microsoft sites, where the API or is still being referenced as form recognizer. So again, just a quick disclaimer there. So what are the model options that you have in Azure Document Intelligence? So you have what are called the document analysis models, which include the read, the layout, and the general document. You have pre-built models, which you can use for documents that are very common, like receipts and things like that. And then you can create your custom model. So if the first two options don't suit your needs, or you have a very specific template that you actually want to automate, you can create your own custom model, and we want to walk through the process of doing that. So document analysis models. The first one is a read model. So this allows you to extract text from documents. It can do print and handwritten text, and it's able to detect paragraphs, text lines, words, locations, and also languages. So it can detect the language of your document if that's something that you want to do. It has a higher resolution than the Vision Read API. So uh, what was called cognitive services, it had a read API that could get text out of images. This one works at a higher resolution so that it can work with the documents that you are going to be feeding in. And then this is the underlying OCR engine for all the other models. So you can think about this read model as the cornerstone for all the other models that we're going to discuss in a little bit. So the development options that you have for the read model, you can use Document Intelligence Studio, which we're going to see in the demo. You can call it as any other REST API. There's a C# SDK, a Python SDK, a Java SDK, and you can also use it in JavaScript. This model ID, we're going to see it during the demo, is key so that you can tell Azure which model you want to use. In this case, is the pre-built read as the ID that you need to use for the read model. Next one is the layout model. So this allows you to extract not just the text, but the layout model or the layout of your document. So for example, a few roles that the text plays in documents, you have geometric roles, which are text, tables, and then you have logical roles like the titles, headings, like the parts of your document. And it combines OCR with deep learning models so that it's able to analyze all that text and it's able to tell, okay, this is a heading. It doesn't just give you the text; it also tells you what role the text plays in your particular document. So this is an example of those roles that you will see in your document. So we have a page header at the top, we have a title, and then paragraphs, and then we have tables. So all these kind of sections or all these kind of data is something that the API is going to be able to give you in case that you have to do that sort of processing. So the development options are pretty much the same as with the other one. You will see that across all these APIs. There's only a handful of them that don't have the same options. For most of them, this one, I think the only difference is that the other one it didn't have a JavaScript SDK, and this one apparently does. But all the other options are the same one that we saw for the previous model. And then we have the general document model, which it's kind of a combination of the other two. So it allows you to extract text, layout, and also any key value pairs from your document. So for example, if you have a date in your document, um, this model will be able to identify it as a key value pair. It's going to say, hey, you have a date here. This is a value that that date has. It is a pre-trained model, so you don't have to do any training for it. And it supports structured, semi-structured, and unstructured documents. So it doesn't need to have a particular template in order to extract all this information for you. So the key value pairs for structured documents, it's a label and the value for that field. So if you're feeding it a form, for example, that has first name and then the field, it will tell you first name and then the value for that particular field. If it is unstructured documents, they are based on the text in the paragraph, so the context. So if it's looking at a contract like in this example, and if there is a date, it will tell you that it is a date, and it will give you the value for that particular piece of text. And again, the options that you have, same ones as the previous one. The only thing that is going to change here again is the model ID that you need to pass to the API. All right, before we move on to the next group of models, any questions about any of the models that we just touched based on?
Nope.
All right, I don't see anything in the chat either, so I am going to continue. So pre-built models. Oops, let's switch over here. So these are, like I said, models that had been trained on documents that have a very specific format and that are very common in everyday life. So for example, an invoice. So it's going to allow you to extract customer and vendor details. Receipt. So if you're feeding a bunch of receipts, maybe you're automating expenses or maybe for tax purposes, it can extract the transaction details for a particular receipt. Identity. So it's going to be able to pull if you're feeding it pictures of driver's licenses or passports, it's going to be able to identify all those fields in the document. Insurance card. So it's also going to be able to identify all the common fields that you would find in an insurance card. You can do W-2s, you can do business cards, you can do contracts, and then you can also do a few different tax forms. So 1098E, a 1098 form, and a 1098T. So development options, again, almost all of these APIs have the same ones. These two have an asterisk because the receipt API does not support or does not have a Java SDK or a JavaScript SDK, but you can still call it as a regular REST API. All the rest of them have these options. And then these are all the different model IDs that correspond to those models that we just saw. So if you're going to be try to analyze or extract information from invoices, you would use the first one, receipts, and so on and so forth. All right. So the last main group of models are the custom models. So if your document has a very unique format or none of the other models that we just reviewed extracts all the information that you need, you can create your own models. So you have the custom template. So extracts data from static layout. So if your template is pretty static, it doesn't change very often, then you want to use the custom template. So the capabilities, it can identify form fields, selection marks, tables, signatures, and also selected regions. Custom neural model, so it extracts data from mixed type documents. So in this case, if you can feed it different formats, different templates for the documents. If it's not something that if you're going to analyze different formats, different types of documents, you probably want to go with this one. It supports the structured, semi-structured, and unstructured data. So if you just have a whole bunch of formats, a whole bunch of documents, then they don't follow any of the other pre-built formats, then you can build and train your own model with samples of those documents. We're going to walk through that in a little bit. And then custom compose, so this extracts data using a collection of models. So if you have a two custom models, for example, you can combine those into a composed model so that you only do one API call instead of calling those two different models. And then you also have a classification model. So if you want to be able to identify the type of document that you are trying to process, so let's say you have an invoice that is very custom to your particular organization or your particular client, and you want to be able to run it, but you want to be able to tell, okay, this is an invoice before you actually extract the information. You can build your classification model, say, oh, hey, all these documents that have this format, these are going to be invoices, and that's the result that I want to get when I call that particular API. So the input requirements for all these APIs. So as far as file formats go, the read API is the one that supports the most. So you can do PDFs, images, and you can do even Microsoft Office documents. The rest of them, you can use PDFs and images, but as of right now, Microsoft Office documents are not supported. So you're going to have to stick with either PDF of images or images of your documents. So model restrictions for PDF and TIFF files up to 2,000 pages can be processed. Two for free tier. Obviously, Microsoft doesn't want you running your application and on the free tier. So for proof of concept, just to see if it's going to work, you can use the free tier for that. File sizes, they have to be less than 500 megabytes or 4 megabytes for the free tier. And the image dimensions also need to follow certain parameters. So between 50 by 50 pixels and 10,000 by 10,000. PDFs can be password protected. Obviously, as smart as these APIs are, they're not going to be able to guess the passwords on your documents. And the minimum size of text is a 8-point text at 150 dpi. So data privacy for these models. Just obviously, if we're talking about using insurance cards or IDs, if you're trying to process those, obviously, I wanted to touch base on this so that you know what kind of protection you have for that. Obviously, there's authentication on all these APIs. You need a key in order to be able to call your endpoint. The data is secured in transit. The input data is encrypted, and the data is stored, so they're only stored temporarily. All these operations are async operations, so you don't get the result right away. Sometimes you need to wait a little bit to get that output. So the output for custom trained models and the models themselves are stored temporarily as well. And if the input data and the input data and the results are deleted within 24 hours, if they're not used for any other purposes. So Microsoft is not going to use the data that you're using on your APIs to train their own models. They use something completely different for that. Now, again, if you're dealing with healthcare information, health insurance information, insurance cards, or IDs, you might have some extra requirements that you cannot reach out to Azure in order to run these models. So you can download these models and run them as containers in your on-premises. So you have that option if that is a requirement for the project that you are working on. You do need to go through a process where you have to fill out some forms and you have to tell Microsoft why you need to download those models and run them on premises. But again, you do have that option if that is a limitation, a legal limitation in the project that you're going to be working on with these APIs. All right. Any questions so far? That's all I have for as far as the theory goes. I want to move on to a demo. So any questions before we actually look at these APIs in action?
None here, but I'm sure I'll have a few after the demos.
Cool. All right. I don't see anything in the chat either. So let me move my screens around. And actually, before we do that, So if anyone has been to any of my presentations before, you know that I like to throw this little prayer. We know that demo goals are fickle and sometimes things don't work. So let this code compile in not an hour, but a little while. Allow this application to run with a speed and zest, as this will keep users glued to my test. If my code blows up in my face, do it with a silent grace. And last but not least, when all is said and run, the DI requirements have been correctly done. All right, let's get started with the demo. So the first thing that I want to show you all is something called Document Intelligence Studio, or as you can see, this is what I was mentioning earlier, that there's a lot of reference to the previous name of this API. So this still says Form Recognizer Studio. It still says it up here in the address bar. So again, if you see that Form Recognizer reference in tutorials or documentation, we're talking about the exact same thing. So this is called now Document Intelligence Studio. And it is an application or a website that allows you to take this API for a spin without having to write a single line of code. So if you're just trying to explore whether the model, which model works, or if this API is going to work at all for your particular scenario, I would say this is a place to start. This is where you want to go. So you can see here, if you scroll through the page, these are the three document analysis models that we discussed. You have the pre-built models that have all the different formats. And then down here, you have the ability to create your custom models. So in this interface, you can go and train your model. We're going to go through that in a little bit. But the other cool thing about it is that if we go, for example, through the general documents, it already has some sample documents that you can use. You don't even have to use your documents if you don't want to. So let's do, so this looks like it's like a stock report or something like that. Um, but you have the option to just use this sample, or you can browse for your own files and run them through here and see what results you would get if you were to use this API. So you can have some options that you can add to here. So you can specify the pages. You can say if you want to analyze, or you want to be able to extract barcodes. So it's able to identify things like that as well. If you want to identify the language, so let's turn that on just for fun. And so these at the bottom, so you can detect things like the font style. You can do high resolution, or you can do formulas. These are extra charge, so very careful if you turn them on while you are doing this testing. So I'm going to click save. I'm going to click run analysis. And then over here on the right hand side of this panel, we're going to get the results once it's completed. So we're going to give it a little bit. There we go. So over here, you can see the key value pairs that it found. It says that it found an IRS ID with that particular value. Again, we didn't have to do any training here. This is already pre-trained. It's already able to identify those kind of things without you having to do that. So here it's able to identify the selections. So let me zoom in a little bit. Oops. So here it's a field, or it's a information that is filled out. It's able to say that the yes option is selected, the no option is unselected, and the same thing for all these other fields down here. And then as far as content, again, I ran the general document, so it's gonna give me not just the text, but the layout of the document. So it's telling me that these two are titles, that there are different paragraphs, obviously, on this document. And I think that's all it has. So selection marks, it's all those selections that it found. And then did it find any tables? So it found two tables, it looks like. And here it tells you the data for those particular tables. So if you see here, it was able to identify the column names, and it's able to identify the actual information in those columns. So this is what the result would look like. So let me download this. We can take a look at that. See, what do I have this open? Let's do Notepad. So this is what it would look like if you're making a call through the REST API. This is what you would get back. Um, so this is a model ID that was used, and then it starts with all the content. You can go through the pages, so you can cycle through each of the pages, and then it gives you all the information that you need to do the processing. So if you need to highlight certain information when you display this in the UI, it can give you that. It provides the confidence of how confident it is that it was able to identify that particular word or that particular section of the document. So as you can see, it's a very long document, which is why you probably want to go with the SDKs if your language is supported when you're processing these documents. The other great thing that you will find with the Document Intelligence Studio is that if you click in the code, you can copy this literally to a console application or just a quick and dirty website, and this code would actually work. You can use it to call the APIs, obviously if you already have a resource created, and start analyzing documents right away. So that's another great thing that will get you started right away without having to do a lot of training and without a lot of hassle. So let's go up a little bit. Let's pull up an identity. Obviously, I'm not going to pull in an actual ID, but we'll just use the sample so that you can see what that would do. So again, this is not a model, or this is not something that you actually need to train. This is already pre-trained. And as you can see here in the fields, it's able to identify the first name, last name, obviously the information there. It's able to pull up the address and actually break it down by postal code, city, state, date of birth. So every single field that you see highlighted here, it was able to identify without having to do any training whatsoever. Again, these two tabs are the same thing that we just saw on the other section, where you can look at the JSON if you want to, and then code. So you can switch. As of right now, the only three languages that I've seen here in the samples are Python, JavaScript, and C Sharp. But again, this is a starter code that you can pull, and it's functional. You can paste it in your application, and you can start using it right away. So for example, I'm gonna do this time. I'm actually gonna do business card. So browse for files. So I'm gonna pull one of mine. This is an old one. Current document. I know it asked me for that. Oh, did I click? I click on the wrong one. Right. I want run analysis. So again, this is another one of those pre-built models. So it was able to identify the company name. So without actually me having to train it or give it a bunch of business cards, it was able to pull the company name and then the contact information. So breaks down the first name and last name automatically, email, the website for the company, again without having to do any sort of training. Now I'll run this other one's a completely different format. So let's see what it comes up with. So again, it's able to identify the name, break it down by first name and last name with a high degree of confidence, emails, websites, and then the phone numbers. So if you're looking for pre-built models and they fall within one of these categories, you don't even have to provide any sample documents for training. You can just go plug into the API and start calling it, and you can start extracting information without a lot of fuss. All right. Any questions about any of the pre-built ones before we actually move on to the custom ones?
Yeah, I have a question for you. So, like with the last business card that you scanned, it was Sam Gomez,
Hmm.
but what if you had another, let's say that you worked for Sam Gomez LLC? Um, would it be able to pick up name versus company and differentiate between the two?
My guess is yes. Just because if you have it as Sam Gomez LLC, I am pretty sure that based on the training that it had, it will be able to identify that LLC is usually a term that you would see in company. I actually don't have. I'll look up an example that has that and I'll run it, but I am pretty sure that it will be able to make that distinction based on the fact that it's been trained on a ton of different sample documents.
Okay, and then going off of that, let's say that the one of the business cards that you put into the batch has a format which wasn't easily recognized, and it kept getting the company and the name confused. Would you be able to train it for that specific format?
Yeah, yeah. So at that point, you can create your own custom model if you're running a lot of these and you find that it's consistently failing with a particular format or a particular type of document. That's when you want to get custom models involved.
But if it works well, I'm trying to phrase it in a way that I can get the point across. Let's say that I have different business cards. Let's say format A, format B, and format C, right, from all
Hmm.
these different companies.
Hmm.
But then there's a format from company X which tends to fail. Will I be? But the other formats from company A through C, they work well with the pre-built models. So can I integrate my custom model in addition to the pre-built models?
Hmm. Yep.
Okay.
Yep. So
So far, it's a very
you would
slick
have
product,
you would probably have to you might have to do an additional processing to figure out which model you want to call, or what you might want to do is set up some sort of logic that based on the confidence, like for example, if let's say, um, so let me pull up the first one because that one had a company. So let's say that the one way that I can think of that you could do this is that let's say here you can see that the company name is 85% certain that it's actually company name. But if, for example, you could go with the confidence score of that particular field in that scenario that you just described, if you're seeing that, for example, in that particular format from company X, the company name is coming back with I don't know, 70% confidence score, you can say, okay, anything that comes with a 70% confidence score, actually going to call my custom model to analyze that particular business card. So that's just one
right?
way that I can think of that you could solve that particular problem or that particular scenario. Did that answer your question, Sam?
Yeah, absolutely. That's perfect. Thank you.
Okay. Mhm. I mean, the other option that you would have is just run everything through the custom models, but then you would have to provide samples for all those different business cards that you have.
Right.
Any questions before we actually move on to custom models? I don't see anything in the chat, so I am going to continue. So, like I said, even from here, you can also do all your training. You can get your uh, model trained and deployed and available for you to call. So from the presentation, if you remember, we talked that there were two main categories of custom models. One was the extraction models, which is going to give you all this data that we've just seen. And then the classification model, which will tell you what type of document it is. So you can use that as a pre-processing step before you actually do the extraction of the information. So we're going to click on create new. I already have one created. So one of the things, again, I am very passionate, and if you start talking to me about soccer, good luck. Good luck stopping me. So I coach my, or I've coached my 6-year-old team for a couple seasons. So one of the things that I've been trying to do for a while is try to manage the snack schedules and the roster and a little bit more efficient. So one of the things that I do is I have a snack sign up sheet that I create so that parents can volunteer if they want for snacks. So one of the things that I've been wanting to do for a while is uh, automate the way that I process that form and I send reminders to parents because sometimes it's a lot to do work and do the training and manage all that. So I have a format that doesn't change that much. It actually hasn't changed obviously for a long time. Let me pull it up in a second. There we go. So this is an example of what the format looks like. If there's uh, any soccer fans in the audience, you can see that I have a lot of very famous players in the team. So again, like I said, this doesn't change that much. So what I wanted to do is create something that would extract information from here so that I could put it on a website. I haven't actually developed it the whole way. I just started with this, but that is the general idea. And I wanted to use a custom model because it is a lot easier to use than the general documents. You're gonna see that in the demo or in the code in a little bit, but that's kind of the to frame the problem or to frame the scenario that we're going to see here. So you can, for your custom models, you can go as low as 5 different samples of your documents in order to train your model. Obviously, as it so happens with machine learning, the more data that you give it, the more data that is available, the better that it's going to get at processing or extracting the information from your documents. But if you can see here, so this is an example of a file or of a document. It has the same information. And the way that you do is you upload those documents so you can browse in your machine. You upload all these documents. So I have 5 in here. And then over here, you can add fields to your model. So you can click on add a field, for example. You can say that you're going to add a table or that you're going to add a field, a selection mark as a signature, and then it's all drag and drop from there. So you see the selections, you can click on that selection and you can click over here where that particular data goes. So let's take this one, for example, click there, and you're saying basically if you see this particular date, for example, it goes in this cell of the table. You have the option, obviously, to give whatever names you want to these columns and these rows. So this is editable. So you can do week here. I just did week 1, week 2, all the way up to week 8. And then same thing with the columns. So if you double click, you can give it whatever name you want. And this name is the one that it's going to come back when you call that API. It's going to be what you're going to use to extract the information for that particular field. So once you're happy with the data that you want to extract from that particular document, as you can see, I'm not extracting everything. So I'm not extracting I'm not extracting the title or anything like that. I'm not extracting this, which I could just to see how many kids I have, but that's not something that I want. And once you have all that labeling done, then you just click on the train button and it will do the training. And once it's ready, it will have your model available for you. So here is the model that I have. it creates a model ID. Actually, I think I might have assigned this particular model ID. So just like with the other pre-built APIs, you use that model ID to tell document intelligence which particular model you want to access. You can test your models straight into Document Intelligence Studio to see how it would behave. Again, before you even have to code anything, you can do that all in here and say, okay, this is actually going to work, or you can be like, okay, this is not going to work. We're going to have to go with a completely different model, or we're going to have to change, or we're going to have to get more data, maybe, whatever the case may be. When you train your model, you have the option to train using um, a template. So we have the custom template and the neural network. The custom template is going to be cheaper than using the neural one. So one thing to consider when you're creating a custom models, which training you're going to use and which type of model. But you have again that option if your documents are not as static as this one that I am uploading. And once you have that particular model, then you have this ID and it's ready to go. You can start calling it. So let's look at that code. So I have two examples on the code that we're going to see. One is using the general document API, and the other one is using this particular model that we use. So the general document, that one is used. One second. There is another document or another file type that I wanted to automate that had this type of format, which again, it helped me manage the team notifications, reaching out to people. So this is the format of that document. So this is printed instead of handwritten. So it's gonna be a lot easier to identify the information. Uh, I could have gone with a custom model for this one, but I kept it with the general document just for this particular demo so you could see the two different options. So it has two tables. It has the has my name on it and my information, and then it has all the information for the players for that particular season. So what that looks like. So again, this code that you are seeing here, I made some minor changes, but it's the code that I copied from Document Studio and I just pasted it here. So like I said, it's ready to go if you copy that. So you can see here, I haven't removed this particular line of code, so it even gives you a sample document you can use. Right now, again, it's very basic. I just haven't hard coded. Obviously, I'm gonna change it so that I can upload a file. Um, but you give it a document that you want to analyze. Obviously, you have to provide the key for the API, and then this is the ID that we've seen on all those other slides. So here I'm doing the pre-built document. I'm passing the file, and then I'm saying I want to analyze that particular document. So I return, and then right here I'm just writing to the console all those key value pairs. I can go through the different pages if it had multiple pages, and I can get all the information. So you can get the location or the coordinates for that particular text in case, again, that you have to do some sort of highlighting when you're going to display on the UI. And then you have styles that you can pull up. And then finally, the tables. So the main difference, obviously, when you have this general document is that the processing that you're going to have to do because it doesn't know the fields on your particular document, you're going to have to do a little bit of processing with these tables. So I had to go through the index. I had to do a bunch of processing in order to get them on a format that could be shown on a table. I'm not going to display that particular data just because it has some, I don't have an example that doesn't have actual sensitive data, so I'm not going to show that. but it's a lot more processing that you actually have to do if you want to access the data from that particular document. Now, if you go through the custom scenario, so the file that I showed that looks like this, so I already have the fields defined on my model. So when it comes to moment, again, the code is exactly the same. The only difference is the model ID that I'm using on one versus the other. But here I can just, instead of doing all that other processing that I went through for the pre-built document, all I have to do is like, hey, I just want the content from the date uh, column for this particular row, or I want the parent-child name, phone number, reminder, and all those correspond to the labeling that I did for this table. So you'll see date, parent-child name, phone number, and then the reminder field. So it does all that in a much easier way because it's a custom format. I know what the fields are, and the model itself knows what the fields are. So if I pull that information over here, I'm able to pull that exact same data that I have on that particular file. I mean, this is a different file than the one that I use for training, but it's able to pull that information and I'm able to present it on the screen. Now, you will see here that because it is handwritten data, so it's a little bit more difficult for it to identify certain values, or it's gonna miss the extraction. So here, instead of a Y, it came back that it had a 4 on that particular row of the document. So there might be some sort of manual intervention that you're going to need, or if this is something that you're trying to process, you might need a human to do an extra review depending on your scenario. But the majority of the data is extracted without having to go through jump through a lot of hoops. So that's it for the custom model. I did see a question. All right. So any questions about what we have seen so far about the code or Document Intelligence Studio? All right.
Sam, this is a Ramnik question.
Sure.
In the example where you showed, like instead of showing Y, it showed 4. Is there a possibility, like looking, you mentioned about like it has the scoring somehow. If the confidence score might be low on this one, was there a possibility to highlight it? Like same where the confidence score is less than this, just highlight this so that if we have a human reviewing this, it will be a little bit easier to do the review.
Yeah. Yeah, you could do that. The other thing that you could do, again, if you're working with a very static template, like here, in this particular scenario, I know that the only two possible values that I would take are either yes or no. So I can highlight this particular row. For example, I can say, okay, 4 is not a value that I am expecting, so I can highlight it there. So there's many things that you can do after that, or you can do while you're processing to 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 bring it to the attention of a human for them to do an additional review.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
Mhm. Any other questions? All right. So that is all I have as far as demos go. I do have a few links with the documentation as well as let me pull that up on the screen. So that is a link to the slides. Before the presentation, I was trying to access that URL and the slides weren't showing, so I'll keep an eye on that. But you can go there and get the slides, and you'll have access to that documentation for the API. And then again, for those of you that weren't here at the beginning of the presentation, you can reach out Twitter or LinkedIn I'll be happy to answer any questions that you might have about any of these APIs, or I'll be happy to chat about soccer as well. That's all I have for today. Thank you again, everyone. Thank you, Sam, for having me, and I hope you found this useful.
I thought it was very useful and very interesting. Before we call it a night, everyone, just have a couple of wrap-up announcements. First and foremost, um, have a few links that I posted in the slide. A few links that I posted in the chat window. And let me go ahead and do a couple of the wrap-up slides. All right, so thanks again to Sam for a great presentation. And there's a couple links that are posted in the chat window, and we'll go through those at this time. So the recording of the presentation will be edited and uploaded to my YouTube channel, and the link for that is posted in the chat window. If you would please subscribe to the channel to get upload notifications. In addition, tech events will also be posted on my blog, and we'll go through those in just a minute as well. And likewise, please subscribe to get updates. Last but not least, the feedback eval. If you would please take a minute to fill that out so we can provide Sam with some constructive criticism. And for those that joined us shortly after the start of the meeting, we have a special offer from Manning.com, 35% off at Manning.com on the selection of books provided at the URL listed below there. And as you might have guessed, that link is also posted in chat. At the end of every meeting, we always like to ask if there's any job openings. You can find a variety of openings over at techsystems.com/IT-jobs. But we always like to ask who's hiring and who's looking for work. Sam, is Geneca looking for work right now?
Yep.
Excellent. What positions are open that you know of?
I'm pretty sure we still have .NET developer openings. So if anyone is interested, feel free to send me your resume, and we'll get you guys in touch.
Excellent. And that's Geneca.com, I assume?
Yep.
Excellent. All right. And if anyone else has any openings, please make yourself known either through chat or verbally. You can also feel free to email me afterwards. My contact information, snasser@nistechnologies.com. My Twitter is @SamNasser, or my X handle, I should say, is @SamNasser. You can also find my blog over at samnasser.blogspot.com. And lastly, if we're not connected on LinkedIn, I invite you to do so. And so with that, thank you all for attending, and thanks again to Sam Gomez for a great presentation as always, and look forward to seeing you all next month. Good night, everyone.